Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, an in-depth discussion about potential changes to how the legislature operates. 2 lawmakers propose constitutional amendments that would reshape the Minnesota legislature. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Lawmakers regularly propose constitutional amendments to tweak the fundamental principles that govern us. In fact, the Minnesota Legislative Reference Library notes that 213 constitutional amendments have been voted on by the electorate, and 120 of them have been adopted since statehood. Joining me is Senator Scott Jensen to talk about an amendment that he would like voters to consider, reducing the size of Minnesota's legislature. Welcome.
Thank you, Shannon.
You have proposed a constitutional amendment that would reduce the Senate to 49 members, currently at 67, and the House to 98, which is currently at 134. You're essentially proposing cutting the legislature down by a fourth. Why?
Basically, it's all about trying to maximize and optimize the service that legislators give to the Minnesotans. The census data in 2020 will be a perfect opportunity for us to look at, should we be doing this? Minnesota has the largest Senate in the land. When you add our Senate and House together, we're 5th largest legislature in the land. We have 5.5 million people and we have 67 senators. California has 40 million people and 40 senators. Let me just say that again. 67 senators for 5 million people, 40 senators for 40 million people. I looked at a lot of states that have populations between 5 million and 10 million, and we're just way out of range. And we cost money. Every legislator we have comes with a price tag. We could probably save 5 million at least if we would just do this. And I think people would be just as well served, because whether you serve 80,000 people or 95,000 people, I don't think the constituent's going to really notice that. And I think that we're out of bounds in terms of what other states are doing.
You are proposing, though, that we keep the ratio the same, 1 senator per 2 House members. And as you said, the Minnesota Senate does have the largest upper body of any state in the United States. About 10 other states operate as we do, with this 2-to-1 ratio, 2 House members per 1 Senate member. And you are proposing to keep that the same. Why keep that ratio the same? If you want it to be smaller, why not just have fewer senators or tweak it that way?
I think you could do that, but I think, in fairness to the House of Representatives, if you have 3 or 4 House members per Senate, that might in some way or another diminish their impact. I think 2 House members, 1 Senate member preserves their impact.
Okay. Based on the 2010 census figures, which are the ones that we have now put out by Ballotpedia, the Minnesota House members represent about 40,000 Minnesotans, therefore Senate is 80,000. If there were fewer legislatures, Minnesotans, as you're proposing, Minnesotans are essentially losing representation.
You could make that case, but I think sometimes less is more. I think in the situation we have now, we perhaps have a very inefficient body that's not getting the job done. We have special sessions almost as the rule. We have gridlock. We turn everything over to a triumvirate at the end of the session. I don't think that this is really looking like a lean, efficient machine. So from my perspective, if you have less elected officials, they might take their job responsibilities more seriously. And we'd have perhaps less junk bills submitted, and we'd have more serious work done. And we'd also have relationships. And I think in those relationships, that's where the work gets done, when we start talking to one another. It's so easy to be polarized right now. There's 134 House members. There are 67 senators. Go to someone else. Talk to them. Now, I think we need to somehow make this a more cohesive group so we get our work done and we're less partisan.
So you think if there were fewer people here in St. Paul doing the legislative work, there would be more accountability to the voters?
I think so, and I think you'd see legislators taking seriously the responsibility for that niche that they're sort of into, whether it's this committee and this committee or whatever. We have some committees that have 15 people on it. You can not show up and whatever. If you have a committee of 7 people or 8 people and you have 2 people that don't show up, they're missed, they're noticed. I think there's a lot of reasons why 49 other states have chosen to do it differently than the Minnesota Senate with our largest Senate in the land.
Well, a smaller legislature would also mean greater responsibilities for each member. We have a part-time legislature, so many members, such as yourself, do have another job. If there are fewer members, there would potentially need to be more work, more specialization, or understanding of certain, different areas of government. Would they need to be paid more since it will take more of their time? I mean, would the costs go up simply because the legislators have more work to do?
Absolutely not. We just got a 50% pay raise. I think that what you would see is you'd see smaller committees and you'd see people taking their responsibilities for that committee very seriously. And they'd work harder and they'd be available to one another, and people would go to those persons and say, help me out, I don't understand this. I think you'd have a tighter, more efficient group. It's sort of like when you form a committee, whether you're doing a community project or a festival project. If you have a committee of 21, you may not get much done, but if you pare that thing down to 7, you may feel that you may see people really roll up their sleeves and say, okay, I'll do this, you do this, let's connect next week and make sure that we got things done. I think that's what we need to do.
One question that occurred to me is about gerrymandering, because basically, if your amendment would become law, each lawmaker would be responsible to more people. Each district would be larger. Do you think it would reduce the effect of gerrymandering, make elections more competitive, and make it harder to draw those lines that can lean towards one partisan group versus another, just simply because the districts are bigger?
I would love to tell you that this bill would reduce gerrymandering, but from what I see of political behavior, I don't think so. I don't think it matters a hoot. We will gerrymander as long as we're allowed to. I think, frankly, we should be having a nonpartisan group of people deciding what the districts are. The legislature should not be doing it itself. We should be in the position where we have to approve it at the end. But we bicker about this every year, every decade, and I don't even think we've been successful in doing it ourselves for the last 3 or 4 decades. I like to think of this, the whole thing as a package. If we go into special session, we shouldn't be getting per diem payments. We should shrink the legislature. We should have term limits. If you actually look at a lot of the legislatures in the country, many of them have term limits. We don't. I think Minnesotans have every right to ask the question, are we being optimally served by the way we're structured?
You just sort of answered my next question, but I still want to talk about it because I just want to preface it with the National Conference of State Legislatures, or the NCSL, which is something that people here in St. Paul at the Capitol pay attention to, had an article a few years ago about the history of change in state legislatures, because I think many people like me think that they're set in stone, and they're not. They can be changed. A handful of states have made changes since 1990, but there was huge change in the 1960s and 70s, both in the size, in staff supporting the legislature, in facilities, and then also the size of legislatures going higher or lower as the lawmakers so decided. Are we entering a time that maybe is ripe for a lot of change?
Well, I think we need to press reset, and we haven't changed the size of our legislature for more than 50 years. And I actually looked and tried to find, when did we start expanding? And I wasn't able to find the specific years and the growth that occurred. If you remember when Governor Dayton defunded the legislature a couple years ago, in that letter he wrote to us, he took away about $130 million. Now, this bill doesn't go anywhere near cutting that amount of money, but you're talking serious dollars, and we have other priorities too. So I think that this would be a perfect time to at least have the conversation with Minnesotans. I've written this bill up as a statutory bill. I've written it up as a constitutional amendment bill. I can't get a hearing. I proposed it last biennium. I'm proposing it this biennium. While I'm here, I'm not going to go quiet. Minnesotans deserve to have the conversation.
Senator Jensen, I want to thank you for your time and your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
For over 2 decades, the Minnesota Historical Society has offered the Shadows and Spirits of the State Capitol tour. What will guests encounter on this tour?
What we do is we recreate the historic lighting in the building as if you're walking into it for the first time in the early 1900s. And as you walk through these shadowy environs, you run into historical spirits, or characters that would have been part of the stories of Minnesota's capital.
On this tour, which spirits will guests encounter?
There's a variety of different people from the building's past. For instance, Judson Bishop is a Civil War veteran who will tell his stories about his war experiences, and that's based upon those beautiful paintings of Civil War regiments in the governor's reception room. We'll see Clara Euland, who is a woman suffragist. She's talking about the right for women to vote and that march to getting that right eventually. And also in the Supreme Court, where we're standing right now, we have the artist appears, and that's John Loehrke. She's the one who did these 4 murals that tell you the evolution, the changes of law throughout time.
Does the tour cover the entire Capitol?
It covers a lot of the different spaces that you would see on any regular tour. So we visit the Rotunda, that's where the tour begins, go to the governor's reception room, go to the Senate, the House Gallery, you get to see the chamber kind of from the bird's eye view, and then we come to the Supreme Court.
What kind of feedback have you gotten over the years from people who've experienced this tour?
Yeah, it's always very positive because you can come during the day to see our regular tours, and so you get one perspective of the building, but when you recreate the historic lighting, it really gives you a sense of what it would have looked like here 100 years ago. And I think people are just thrilled to see these different stories being told, and it's really just a really fun way to look at the Capitol in a different light.
Joining me is Senator John Marty to talk about an amendment he would like voters to consider, changing the legislature from a bicameral to a unicameral body. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Your amendment would essentially eliminate the House of Representatives. Why?
Well, it would eliminate one of the 2 houses. I choose to call the one that would create a Senate, but you could call it a House of Representatives. It's smaller than the House, the current House, but it's larger than the Senate. Overall, it would cut the number of legislators in half, but I think that's a reasonable thing. The reason I'm pushing this is I think it's a far more accountable, far more thoughtful process than the one we have, which is counterintuitive to people, but I actually think it's far more accountable. And realistically, how many other governing bodies of corporations, of unions, of school districts, of anything have 2 bodies? 2 corporate boards, and one decides this, the other decides this, and we have a conference committee of the corporate board. It'd be an untenable situation. You couldn't get anything done, and you're not getting better decision making through this process. And I believe a single House legislature would be far more accountable.
Well, there is one in the United States. It's the state of Nebraska. Otherwise, all other states, including Minnesota, have bicameral. Having a House and a Senate with differing term lengths mimics our Congress. It also provides greater checks and balances for law and policy, or at least that's the belief for the system.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So why is this not your belief?
Sure. Simple. We have 2 processes totally independent of each other. Again, go back to the corporate board. Well, we have the House corporate board and the Senate corporate board, and they each figure out how we're going to operate the company and make the thing move forward. And then we got to take our hundreds of budget and operational procedural things and merge them with the 100-some done by the other body, and we compromise on this and do this. It's chaos. And it's not more thoughtful. In theory, what we're told in high school and grade school civics is that the Senate may be more deliberative and the House more in touch and so on. And so they'll push things and we'll check on them. But that's not the way things work. First of all, when you race it through so many procedural steps, you have to go through all the Senate committees and all the House committees. Then you have to put it through, have the House pass it, the Senate pass it. Then you have the conference committee and they do it and they negotiate and so on. That negotiation period alone is close to 1/3 of the legislative session. That's not time spent thinking over and deliberating over the policy. That's spent negotiating between this or that, really not looking into the details, but we're for this and you're for that. Let's argue about how much we can get and how much you can get. Instead, we should be spending more time studying the arguments. I remember one time a number of years ago during a special session when things were even more raced, where the Senate had passed a provision. It was a minor thing, but the Senate overwhelmingly passed it, maybe a handful of no votes. It wasn't controversial. A staff member came running in saying, the House won't accept it. The House won't accept that language. Based on, whether it's true or false, a rumor from a staff person that the other body wouldn't accept it, the Senate voted to undo that step. That's legislating by rumor. Is that thoughtful? No. I've also seen people put extra provisions in bills saying, well, we'll use them as bargaining chips with the other body. We'll use them. The Senate will put these bargaining chips in to get something from the House. Sometimes those bargaining chips you didn't really intend to become law. That's a terrible way to legislate. It's easier for lobbyists to have their tweak. All you have to be as an effective lobbyist to get some budget provision or something in is know the right people on the right committee, 1 or 2 people, and then they pass it in their house, and then it goes to conference committee, and they can put it in. The other body didn't even look at the idea. So many things we get have never even been looked at, and we're voting on them, and we can't change them. It's a very unaccountable process, and that's why no corporation, no city council, no anybody else would have a bicameral system.
So you're convinced that making it a unicameral system would bring greater efficiency, but knowing...
And better accountability. I mean, city councils, there used to be some city councils that had Senate, 2 chambers to the city council. They got rid of that. It's not a good way to run things. I know why we historically have it, but that doesn't make it a good way to do it.
You're pointing to businesses and other entities that only have one body. The business thing often is a Republican idea to make government function more like a business. You're actually then possibly in agreement with a Republican theory.
Well, by the way, this is not a unicameral. Jesse Ventura, when he was governor, supported it, but not very articulately. Steve Svigum, who was the Republican Speaker of the House at the time, he was an author of the bill. I've had Republican authors of this bill before. There are plenty of Republicans and Democrats. It's not a partisan issue. It's clearly not that. Some people, they say, well, we want the accountability, we want the checks and balances. And I say, no, we race things through a process here, and by putting extra steps in, they somehow think it's more accountability. I think a constitution should have barriers to make it harder to pass legislation. Our Constitution already has some. One of the common ones is we have to have bills read on 3 separate days, so you can't race something through in a hurry when somebody happens. You have to take the time to do it. What do we do now? Well, the Constitution does allow an out that says if it's convenient, you can declare an urgency and have all 3 readings on one day. We do that for routine bills day after day. We just override that constitutional check and balance. Our bill actually has a thing that would change that constitutional standard from convenient to for a necessity. So in other words, the legislature finds it necessary to do that, not it finds it convenient to race through and bypass these checks.
In a sense, you're arguing then to modernize the legislature based on our historical experience with the way things have been done, the way we've all learned about it in school. This would modernize it to make it work for a state and for people who are more connected, who have easier access.
I think I think this would be good for any kind of system. I think that's why almost any other governing entity of a nonprofit, of a corporation, of school districts, cities, everybody else, that's the reason they all use a governing body, and they try and put checks and balances into that. We've created this system, we didn't, but our ancestors did, that was supposed to be more accountable, more check and balance. But in the end, because of the way human nature is, we find ways to bypass it. Instead of having all 201 legislators look at each provision, we have 10 conference committee members making decisions that this year, like many others, ends up being 3 people. The governor and the speaker and the majority of the Senate. Session. And they put things together, and most of us have never seen them. You would have a chance. If I don't like a provision in a bill, up till final passage, I can change any provision in the bill. But here we'll have, bill comes back from conference committee, we'll have 50 things in that not a single senator has ever voted on. And now we are expected to vote for the entire package, take it or leave it. And that's the way you have to do it when you have 2 sets of bodies doing totally independent work and then trying to merge thousands of working parts together. There's no simple way to go around that. But it's far more accountable if every member is expected to do this. And if I don't like a provision, I can't say, well, I didn't have a choice, it came with the package. If I don't like it, if I feel strongly about it, I can vote to take it, I can make an amendment to take it out of a bill until final passage. But once it's in conference committee, it's take it or leave it.
So your proposed amendment would create 99 districts instead of the 201 that are split between the Senate and the House. Minnesota's population is roughly 5.5 million,
Okay.
so that means about 56,000 people per district, but only one representative.
Right.
Will Minnesotans have fair and adequate representation?
I think they have fairer and better representation that way. If the goal is to have two, then I'd rather have a unicameral legislature and have two-member districts where they can elect two different people in a district. I'm fine with that. But the bottom line is, I think it's not only, it happens to be less expensive, but we want it because it's more accountable, more fair, and the lobbyists have less clout, the public has more say.
Senator John Marty, a very interesting proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Brian Pease of the Minnesota Historical Society offers insight into another state capitol feature in our series, The People's House. The Minnesota Capitol incorporates stone from all over the world, and architect Cass Gilbert ruffled some feathers when he chose a Georgia white stone for the exterior. Why did he make that choice?
What he was trying to do is emulate what he had seen in the Chicago World's Fair or the Columbian World's Exposition of 1893. That was called the White City. And so that whole concept was you're trying to bring back the center of democracy, which would have been Greece and Rome, and you'd bring back those architectural features to help inspire those citizens and the people elected to work in those buildings. And that was stone. The stone from that area was white. And so he wanted that Georgia marble stone, because that was a beautiful white stone, relatively newer quarries. They hadn't been really exhausted or used a lot until the 1890s. And so this was a perfect stone, he thought, for the exterior of the building. It did create some controversy, because what you want in Minnesota when you're building your own state capitol is Minnesota stone. So we have plenty of granite, and we have sandstone and limestone. So people were saying, let's help the people of the state by building our capitol with materials we can take out of the ground right within our boundaries. And so he pushed against that. And the other part of that too was you had the unions, you had the carpenters, and you had the stone cutters and carvers and all the people that are supposedly getting jobs here. You want them to have the jobs to do the stone carving here. So the fear was, if you buy stone from Georgia, they're going to cut the stone out of the quarry, they're going to dress the stone down in Georgia. All the people in Minnesota are going to lose those job opportunities.
So they worked out a compromise.
They did, yeah. So the Butler Ryan Company, the general contractors to build this capitol, went down to Georgia, bought the quarry, and now you cut out that middleman. So now you can send up all the materials raw, and then the northwest corner of the Capitol building site, they built their own stone mills and stone carver sheds. So people were hired from Minnesota and the local areas to do that work on site. So it was a win-win for everybody.
I counted at least 21 different types of stone in the Capitol. Why is there so much variety?
Well, Cass Gilbert, once again, is trying to recreate these Italian Renaissance buildings. And so they were bringing in stone from all over Europe. And so you have, because of that variation of colors and tones, you can really create some beautiful architectural vistas. And you can look down one end of the building to the other and see different types of stone, different colors. And so he incorporated as many of those different stones from throughout the world as he could to incorporate into the decoration. And some of them are really small scale stones, and others are huge columns from Italy, for instance. And you have stone, the stone points in the star and the rotunda, those pinkish, orangish triangles are from Africa. And then there's the balusters and the railings on the second floor are all from Greece. So there you just get a good sample of some of the stone that he was bringing in to make this a really beautiful building.
And so here we are on the second floor, the grand floor of the rotunda, and there are columns all around. Some are Italian, some are Minnesota. Talk about the different kinds of stone and how he incorporated it into this space.
Right. Once again, you have this palace to talk about all these different types of stone from throughout the world, but you also want to remember this is Minnesota state capitol. So the second floor rotunda is really a showplace of that Minnesota stone. All the interior wall stone is a Kasota limestone, which is a pretty common building material today. He was one of the first to actually use that rougher limestone, have it buffed and polished to make it look like a marble.
And so that's what we see on the walls right here around
Right,
us.
and then that set the whole color tone for the rest of the interior decoration. You know, what matches those tan tones throughout the building. Plessy used these big columns, granite columns from Minnesota on the east and west side of the second floor rotunda, some huge granite columns from Ortonville. So once again, you're showcasing some of that granite industry of the state. And so then above those columns, there's a pink ribbon of stone, and that's Sioux quartzite. So that represents the southwestern corner of the state, where there's a lot of deposits of this reddish stone that you'll find throughout that corner of the state of Minnesota. So once again, it's a place that you're talking about government and the state history, but also state products as part of that decoration.
I've been told that at least one type of stone in the Capitol is now extinct. Is that true, and which one is it?
Yeah, we believe the stone that you'll find in the Senate chamber, which is called a fleur de pêche, which in French is peach flower. And it's a really beautiful purple, marbled, and huge grained texture to that, and it's a really unique stone to this entire building. And so we believe the stone that we use in that chamber no longer exists in France. The quarry, because it's been quarried for so many centuries, is pretty much gone.
Some people say that the Italian columns that are outside the Senate chamber and also outside the Supreme Court were not put together properly, and that's why the columns don't match. Is that true?
That's a good story that's been perpetuated for many generations in the Capitol, but we do have letters that Cass Gilbert is writing to the Butler Ryan Company as they're doing the final kind of tweaking of those spaces. And he delineates, and he has a circle on for each one of these big colonnades that he wants on the center section, that one centerpiece turned 1/4 this way. He wants another section taken from this column and moved to the other side. So he was fine-tuning them with the intention of them not matching. So the idea was he wanted to have a variety of colors and patterns, so when you looked up and down that second floor, ground floor, you would see these beautiful vistas, and you would have kind of just all these different colors coming together. And it's, when you take a close look, he was very careful of where he wanted the different color schemes. So if you look toward the Senate side, the big columns that are in 3 pieces, those are all from Italy, of course, but they all have a reddish to grayish tint to it. The ones on the Supreme Court side all have a greenish and gray tint. So he didn't have those colors mixed and matched. He wanted them separate for each side of the second floor.
So from a historian's perspective, what stones represent Minnesota? What's the most important stonework that's in the Capitol building?
Well, we talked about the Kasota limestone, which is prevalent throughout every floor of the state capitol. So that really is the kind of the stone you'll see when you walk into the building. But we mentioned the granite columns from Minnesota. There's also the granite steps and foundation from the outside. So that was part of that compromise, that Gilbert could use the white stone but also needed to incorporate some granite and Minnesota local stone in the exterior. And that really is, it gives a good contrast of kind of this speckled, darker base, and then you get this beautiful white building in its dome looming above that foundation.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.